Outside a weathered diner in a forgotten corner of America, a little girl with dirt on her hands and mischief in her heart decided to play mechanic on a broken Harley Davidson. Her friends giggled as she pretended to fix the chrome beast, just another childhood game on a slow summer afternoon. But when the motorcycle's owner stepped into the sunlight, everything changed. The grizzled biker's eyes locked onto something around her neck. A small silver pendant. The same symbol his daughter wore the day she died. Time itself seemed to pause in that dusty lot. Two strangers, separated by decades and circumstance, suddenly bound by an impossible connection that neither could explain. What brought them to this moment? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Dust Creek got its name honestly. Every gust of wind carried particles of red earth through the streets, settling on windowsills and coating parked vehicles with a fine layer that never quite disappeared. Located 3 hours from anywhere that mattered, it was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere else. The diner, simply called May's, sat at the intersection of Route 47 and Old Mill Road, a crossroads that had seen better days when the mill still operated and gave folks a reason to stop. May herself had run the establishment for 37 years, ever since her husband passed and left her with a mortgage and a dream that wouldn't die. The chrome stools at the counter had been reupholstered 5 times. The checkerboard floor tiles, once bright and gleaming, now showed the wear of countless boots and the passage of time. But the coffee was always hot. The pie was always fresh, and May's smile never faltered, even on days when only a handful of customers wandered through her door. On this particular afternoon in late August, the heat shimmered off the asphalt parking lot in visible waves. A broken Harley Davidson sat at an angle near the diner's entrance, its chrome dulled by dust, its engine silent for reasons known only to its owner. The motorcycle had been there since dawn, a metallic sentinel waiting for attention that hadn't yet arrived. Jack Reeves had pushed the bike into that spot himself, his weathered hands gripping the handlebars with the kind of familiarity that comes from decades of riding. At 63, Jack carried himself with the careful economy of movement that veterans of hard living often develop. His beard, more salt than pepper now, framed a face mapped with lines that told stories he rarely shared. The leather vest he wore, decorated with patches from places he'd been and brothers he'd lost, hung loose on shoulders that had once been broader, more formidable. Inside May's, Jack sat in his usual booth by the window, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and staring at nothing in particular. The booth's red vinyl had a tear near the edge that May kept meaning to fix. Jack's calloused fingers traced the rip absently, while his mind wandered paths it had traveled too many times before. 15 years since Sarah died, and some days it felt like 15 minutes. Other days, it felt like a lifetime ago, like she'd been part of someone else's story altogether. The grief had changed over time, morphing from a sharp, debilitating pain into something more like a constant ache, a permanent companion that colored everything he saw and did. The pendant. God, the pendant. He'd had it made special for her 16th birthday. The symbol wasn't anything mystical or profound, just a design Sarah had doodled in her notebook one afternoon, a geometric pattern she found beautiful in its simplicity. He'd taken that drawing to a jeweler in Albuquerque, had it engraved on sterling silver, presented it to her wrapped in blue paper, because blue was her favorite color. She'd worn it every single day after that, until the accident. They'd recovered the necklace from the wreckage, returned it to him in a small plastic bag, along with her other personal effects. He'd kept it in a wooden box on his dresser for years, unable to wear it, unable to throw it away, unable to do anything but occasionally open the box and remember. May approached with the coffee pot, her orthopedic shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. "Refill, Jack." He nodded without looking up. May had learned long ago not to press him on days like this. Some silences demanded respect. "Thompson's garage called," she said, pouring the dark liquid with practiced precision. "Said he could get to your bike tomorrow afternoon, maybe the day after. Needs to order a part? Appreciate you taking the message. You know you're welcome to stay at my place if you need somewhere tonight. Got a spare room that's just collecting dust." Jack's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're kind, May, but I've got my bedroll. Spent plenty of nights under the stars. One more won't kill me." May patted his shoulder with maternal affection and moved on to check on her other customers. A young couple passing through and an elderly man who came in every day at 3 o'clock for pie and milk. Through the window, Jack could see a group of children playing in the empty lot across the street. There were 4 of them, ranging in age from maybe 7 to 10. Even from this distance, he could hear their laughter. That pure, uninhibited sound that children make when the world hasn't yet taught them to guard their joy. One of them was a girl with tangled brown hair pulled into a ponytail that had mostly given up. She wore denim overalls with grass stains on the knees and sneakers that had seen better days. There was something about her energy, the way she moved with complete confidence, that reminded Jack of Sarah at that age. Bold, fearless, ready to take on the world with nothing but imagination and determination. The children were playing some elaborate game that seemed to involve a lot of running and dramatic gestures. Jack watched them with the detached interest of someone observing a world he no longer belonged to. Children were mysteries to him now, inhabitants of a realm he'd lost access to the day Sarah died. He'd been a good father once. Not perfect, but present. He'd taught Sarah how to ride a bicycle, how to cast a fishing line, how to change the oil in a car. He'd braided her hair for school, attended every parent-teacher conference, showed up to every softball game, even when his construction jobs ran long and left him bone-tired. After her mother left when Sarah was 3, it had been just the 2 of them against the world, and they'd made it work. Then one rainy November night, a drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 82, and everything Jack had built, everything he'd fought for, everything that gave his life meaning, was gone in an instant of twisted metal and shattered glass. The grief had nearly killed him. For months, maybe years, he'd existed in a fog, going through the motions of living without any real purpose. He'd sold the house because every corner held memories that cut like glass. He'd quit his job because showing up every day to build structures for other people's futures felt like a cruel joke when his own future had been stolen. He'd climbed onto his Harley and started riding, searching for something he couldn't name, running from ghosts that followed him everywhere. That was 15 years ago. He was still riding, still searching, still running. May's was one of several places he returned to periodically, drawn by the kindness May showed him and the anonymity the small town offered. Here he was just Jack, the quiet biker who kept to himself. Nobody asked questions. Nobody demanded explanations. Nobody expected him to be anything other than what he was, a broken man trying to make peace with an unforgivable world. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The heat was finally breaking, replaced by a breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Jack paid his tab, left May a generous tip he could barely afford, and headed for the door. Outside, the air felt good on his face. He stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the brightness, then walked toward his disabled Harley. The bike was a 1998 Fat Boy, more rust than original paint at this point, but it ran like a dream when it wasn't broken down. He'd bought it the year after Sarah died, needing something powerful and loud to drown out the silence in his head. The children had noticed him now. Their game had paused, and they were staring at the motorcycle with the open fascination kids have for anything large and mechanical. Jack kept his distance, not wanting to intrude on their world. He knelt beside the bike, checking the engine one more time, even though he knew the problem was beyond his limited mechanical skills. "Mister, is that your motorcycle?" Jack looked up to find the girl with the ponytail standing a few feet away, her friends clustered behind her with varying degrees of courage and curiosity. "It is," Jack said, his voice rough from disuse. "It's really big." "That it is. Is it broken?" Jack nodded. "Engine trouble." Waiting on a part? The girl tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. My dad used to have a motorcycle before he left. There was a story there, Jack recognized, one that probably had sharp edges and unhealed wounds. He understood that better than most. I bet it was a nice one, Jack offered. I don't really remember it much. I was little. She took a step closer. Can I see? Jack hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no, to maintain the distance he'd carefully constructed between himself and the rest of humanity. But there was something in the girl's eyes, a mixture of genuine interest and barely concealed loneliness, that made him relent. Sure, just don't touch anything. Lot of hot metal and sharp edges. The girl approached with exaggerated care, her friends emboldened by her bravery. They formed a semicircle around the Harley, their small faces filled with wonder. What's this part do? The girl asked, pointing at the exhaust pipe. That's where the sound comes out. Makes it loud. And this? Gas tank. Holds the fuel. The girl's hand reached toward the handlebars, then stopped, remembering his warning. Can I sit on it? She asked, her voice hopeful. Jack found himself smiling despite his usual reserve. Maybe another time, when it's running and I can hold it steady. Don't want it tipping over on you. I'm Emma, the girl announced. That's Tyler, that's Madison, and that's Sam. She pointed to each of her friends in turn. Tyler was the tallest, gangly, and awkward in the way of boys approaching adolescence. Madison wore glasses that kept sliding down her nose. Sam, the youngest, had a gap-toothed smile and dirt smudged across one cheek. Jack, he replied, the simple introduction feeling strange after so many interactions where he'd remained nameless. Do you live here, Jack? Emma asked, just passing through. Bike broke down, so I'm stuck until it's fixed. Where are you going? Jack considered the question. Where was he going? The truth was, he'd been riding in circles for 15 years, following roads that led nowhere in particular, stopping when he got tired, moving on when staying in one place became unbearable. West, he said finally. Just west. Emma seemed satisfied with this non-answer. She walked around the bike slowly, her fingers hovering over the chrome and leather without quite touching, respecting boundaries in a way that spoke of good parenting or hard-learned lessons. I could fix it for you, she announced suddenly, her face brightening with mischief. Her friends giggled. Tyler shook his head with the exaggerated patience of someone who'd witnessed Emma's schemes before. Emma, you don't know anything about motorcycles. So? I can learn. She turned to Jack with exaggerated seriousness. I'm very good with my hands. I fixed my bicycle chain last week all by myself. Did you? Jack found himself engaged despite his better judgment. Well, my mom helped a little. But I did most of it. That's impressive. Emma's chest puffed with pride. Then, without warning, she dropped to her knees beside the motorcycle and began making exaggerated mechanical gestures, her small hands miming the work of a professional mechanic. Her friends burst into laughter, and even Jack felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Let me just check this doohickey here, Emma said in a comically deep voice, clearly imitating some adult she'd seen. And adjust the thingamajig. Yep, I see the problem. You've got a broken whatchamacallit. The performance was ridiculous and charming in equal measure. Jack watched as Emma continued her theatrical repairs, complete with sound effects and elaborate hand movements. For a brief moment, the weight he carried lightened, and something that felt dangerously close to joy flickered in his chest. Then Emma straightened up, brushing dirt from her overalls, and turned to face him with a triumphant smile. All fixed! Just like that? Jack played along. Just like that. That'll be $100. $100? That's steep. I'm a professional, Emma said with mock indignation. The other children were laughing so hard that Madison's glasses actually fell off. Sam was doubled over, clutching his stomach. Even Tyler, trying to maintain his preteen coolness, couldn't suppress his grin. And then Emma moved, reaching up to adjust something, and the light caught it. A glint of silver at her neck. A pendant on a thin chain, half hidden beneath the collar of her shirt. Jack's smile froze. His breath caught in his throat. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. The pendant. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But even from several feet away, even with his aging eyes and the fading afternoon light, he recognized the pattern. The same geometric design, the same distinctive shape, the exact same symbol that Sarah had drawn in her notebook all those years ago. Time seemed to slow and thicken. The children's laughter faded to a distant buzz. His heart hammered against his ribs with enough force that he wondered if he was having a heart attack. His hands began to tremble. "Jack, are you okay?" Emma's voice cut through the fog, concerned now. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what he was seeing. The pendant hung there, catching the late afternoon sun, throwing off sparkles of reflected light that seemed impossibly bright. It was Sarah's necklace, or one exactly like it, which meant it was impossible. The design wasn't some common symbol he might see anywhere. It had been unique, Sarah's creation, something she'd invented in a moment of bored creativity during math class. He'd taken that specific drawing to that specific jeweler and had it custom made. There had been only one. So how was this child, in this nowhere town, thousands of miles from where Sarah had died, wearing that symbol around her neck? The questions cascaded through his mind, each one more impossible than the last. The coincidence was too great. The universe didn't work this way. Dead daughters didn't send messages through living children. Grief didn't manifest in silver pendants on strangers' necks. And yet there it was. "Mr. Jack?" Emma's voice was closer now, worried. "You look really pale." Jack forced himself to breathe, in, out, the simple mechanics of staying alive. "Your necklace," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get it?" Emma's hand went to her throat automatically, her fingers closing around the pendant, protectively. The gesture was so familiar, so perfectly echoing Sarah's own habit, that Jack felt his eyes burn with tears he hadn't shed in years. "It was my mum's," Emma said, her earlier playfulness replaced by something more guarded. "She gave it to me before she got sick." The world spun. Jack gripped the motorcycle's handlebar to steady himself, his knuckles white with pressure. Before May could look out the window and see him collapse. Before these children could witness a grown man fall apart. Before he said or did something that would require explanations he didn't have and couldn't give. He needed answers. He needed to understand. He needed to know how the impossible had just walked into his life wearing Sarah's face and Sarah's necklace and asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Jack's legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath him had turned to water. He released his grip on the handlebar and took a step back, needing distance, needing space to think. The children watched him with wide eyes, their earlier joy replaced by confusion and concern. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out rougher than intended. "I just need a minute." Emma's brow furrowed. She clutched the pendant tighter, her protective instinct fully engaged now. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, God, no." Jack ran a trembling hand through his hair. "You didn't do anything wrong, but the damage was done." The moment had shifted. The easy interaction they'd been having was now colored by his reaction, by the naked emotion that had broken through his carefully maintained walls. Tyler put a hand on Emma's shoulder, pulling her back slightly. Madison adjusted her glasses nervously. Sam looked ready to bolt. Jack recognized the signs. He'd become what children were warned about. The strange adult acting strangely. The unpredictable variable in their safe afternoon. "You kids should head home," he said, trying to inject normalcy into his voice. "Getting late." "It's only 5 o'clock, Emma protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Still, I'm sure your folks are expecting you." The group began to back away, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Emma was the last to turn, her eyes still on Jack, questions written across her young face that he couldn't begin to answer. Then she was running to catch up with her friends, the 4 of them disappearing around the corner of May's diner, their laughter and lightness gone. Jack stood alone in the parking lot, the setting sun casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. His hands were still shaking. His heart was still racing. The impossible image of that pendant was burned into his mind, refusing to be rationalized or explained away. He needed to sit down. He needed to think. He needed, God help him, he needed a drink. though he'd been sober for 12 years and wasn't about to break that streak now, no matter how much the world had just tilted sideways. The diner door opened and May stepped out, her face concerned. She'd clearly been watching through the window. "Jack, you all right?" "I'm fine," he lied. "You don't look fine. You look like you've seen a ghost." The phrase hit closer to truth than May could know. Jack attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just had a moment. Low blood sugar, maybe." May wasn't buying it, but she'd known him long enough to recognize when he needed space. "Come inside. I'll make you a sandwich. On the house." "I appreciate it, May, but I think I need some air. The air out here looks mighty similar to the air in there, just with less shade." She crossed her arms, assuming the stance of a woman who'd raised 3 children and knew stubbornness when she saw it. "At least come sit in the shade. You're going to give yourself heat stroke standing in the sun like that." Jack allowed himself to be guided to one of the picnic tables outside the diner, positioned under an awning that provided blessed relief from the direct sunlight. He sank onto the weathered bench, his body feeling 20 years older than it had an hour ago. May disappeared back inside and returned moments later with a glass of ice water and a ham sandwich cut into triangles. She set both in front of him without comment, then sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. "The little girl," May said after a moment. "Emma Thornton." "She startled you." Jack's head snapped up. "You know her?" "Small town, Jack. I know everybody. Her mother was Claire Thornton. Died about 6 months ago. Cancer. Emma's living with her grandmother now out on Sycamore Street." The information hit Jack like physical blows. Mother dead. Living with grandmother. The parallels to his own story were too numerous, too precise. But that didn't explain the pendant. "The mother," Jack said carefully. "Claire. Where was she from originally?" May's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing that this wasn't idle curiosity. "Not from here. Moved to Dust Creek about 8 years ago, maybe 9. Didn't talk much about her past. Some folks said she was running from something. Others figured she just wanted a fresh start. She worked at the library, kept to herself mostly. Nice woman, quiet. It was terrible what happened to her." "Did she have family before she came here?" "If she did, they never visited. Never heard her mention anyone." May leaned forward. "Jack, what's this about? Why are you asking about Claire Thornton?" How could he explain? How could he put into words what he'd seen, what it meant, without sounding insane? A necklace that matched his dead daughter's, a symbol that shouldn't exist anywhere else in the world. A coincidence so massive it bent the laws of probability into shapes that made no sense. "The necklace Emma was wearing," Jack said slowly. "The silver pendant. Did you ever notice it?" May thought for a moment. "Can't say I paid much attention. Why?" "It's just that it reminded me of something. Someone." Understanding dawned in May's eyes, soft and sad. "Your daughter." Jack had never explicitly told May about Sarah, but small towns had ways of knowing things. He'd mentioned enough over the years, dropped enough hints in unguarded moments, that May had pieced together the broad strokes of his tragedy. "Yeah," Jack admitted. "My daughter. Loss can play tricks on us," May said gently. "Make us see connections that aren't really there. The mind looks for patterns, especially when we're grieving. This isn't a trick, May. That design, it was unique. Sarah drew it herself. I had it custom made for her 16th birthday. There was only one. Could the jeweler have made copies? Used the design for other customers?" The question was reasonable, logical, the kind of explanation that would satisfy most people. But Jack had been to that jeweler's shop. Old Mr. Hendricks, traditional as they came, who prided himself on one-of-a-kind pieces. He'd shown Jack his book of original designs, insisted on exclusivity, charged extra for the guarantee that no one else would have the same piece. "No," Jack said firmly. "That's not possible." May reached across the table and covered his weathered hand with her own. Her touch was warm, maternal, grounding. "Then there's got to be another explanation. Maybe it's similar, but not the same. Maybe in your surprise you saw what you wanted to see." Jack pulled his hand away, not unkindly, but firmly. "I know what I saw." "Okay." May leaned back, assessing him. "So what are you going to do about it?" "That was the question, wasn't it?" What could he do? Confront a grieving child and demand to know where her dead mother got a necklace? Follow Emma home and interrogate her grandmother? Start digging into the past of a woman who'd apparently wanted to leave her history behind? Every option felt wrong, invasive, like he'd be causing harm to people who'd already suffered enough. But the alternative was worse. Walking away from this, climbing on his bike when it was fixed, and riding off with questions that would haunt him for whatever years he had left. Living with the knowledge that he'd been this close to understanding something that made no sense, and he'd let fear or propriety stop him from pursuing it. "I don't know," Jack admitted. "But I can't just let this go." May nodded slowly. "I figured you'd say that. Just promise me you'll be careful. That little girl has been through enough without some stranger stirring up things that might be better left alone. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I know that. But hurt happens anyway sometimes, even with the best intentions." The wisdom in May's words settled over Jack like a weight. She was right. He could pursue this mystery, follow these threads, demand answers. But in doing so, he might unravel something in Emma's life that needed to stay intact. The girl had lost her mother. She was wearing a necklace that clearly meant something to her, carried memories and connections Jack couldn't begin to understand. What right did he have to intrude on that? What right did his need for closure give him to potentially disrupt a child's fragile peace? The sun had fully set now, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and deep blue. The air had cooled considerably. In the distance, Jack could hear the evening sounds of Dust Creek settling into night. Dogs barking, doors closing, the low hum of television sets through open windows. Normal life, continuing around him while his own existence had just been fundamentally shaken. May stood, collecting the dishes. "You're welcome to sleep in the diner's back room tonight. There's a cot there, clean linens. Better than sleeping outside." "I can't accept that." "You can and you will. It's already decided." She headed toward the door, then paused. "Jack, whatever you decide to do, sleep on it first. Things always look different in the morning." He watched her disappear inside, her wisdom trailing behind her like perfume. But Jack knew that morning wouldn't change what he'd seen. Morning wouldn't make the impossible any more possible. The pendant was real. The connection was real. And somehow, he was going to find out what it meant. Jack didn't sleep that night. He lay on the cot in May's back room, staring at the ceiling where water stains formed abstract patterns in the dim light filtering through the window. His mind ran in circles, chasing the same questions from different angles, never arriving at answers that satisfied. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and old grease, familiar scents that should have been comforting in their mundaneness. But comfort was beyond reach. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the pendant catching the light. Every time his mind started to drift, Sarah's face surfaced from memory, young and alive, and wearing that same necklace. At dawn, he gave up the pretense of rest. He rose, splashed water on his face from the utility sink, and tried to make himself presentable. His reflection in the small mirror showed a man who'd aged a decade overnight. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, the grey in his beard more pronounced. May arrived at 6 to start the morning prep. She found Jack already sitting at the counter nursing a cup of coffee he'd made himself. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, though the answer was written plainly on his face. "Not much." She busied herself with the morning routine, pulling pies from the walk-in refrigerator, setting up the coffee station, checking inventory. The familiar rhythm of her movements was soothing to watch, evidence that some things remained constant, even when others spiraled into chaos. "I've been thinking," May said after a while, not looking at him. "About what you said yesterday." "About the necklace," Jack straightened. "And?" "Emma's grandmother, Dorothy Thornton, she comes in here every Wednesday for lunch. Has done for years. She's a good woman, fair. Been through hell with Claire's sickness and then losing her. But she's strong. You're telling me to talk to her. I'm telling you she might have answers you're looking for. And she's the kind of person who'd rather face questions head-on than have someone snooping around behind her back." The suggestion was sound. Adults talking to adults, asking questions directly instead of investigating like some detective in a bad movie. It was the respectful approach, the right approach. It was also terrifying. What if she thinks I'm crazy? Jack asked. Then she thinks you're crazy. That's not the worst thing in the world. May paused in her work, finally meeting his eyes. But I don't think she will. Dorothy's seen enough of life to know that strange things happen. Coincidences that don't feel like coincidences. Connections that defy explanation. Jack absorbed this. When does she usually come in? Around noon. Sits at that corner booth, orders the meatloaf special. May pointed to a booth with a good view of the parking lot. But Jack, you need to be gentle. That family's been through enough. I know. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that there's a simple explanation. That this isn't what you think it is. But what did he think it was? Jack couldn't articulate it even to himself. Some cosmic connection between his dead daughter and this living child. A message from beyond the grave. The universe's way of giving him closure he'd never found. None of those explanations made sense. None of them aligned with his understanding of how the world worked. He'd never been a religious man, never believed in signs or fate or divine intervention. Death was death. Loss was loss. The world kept turning with brutal indifference to individual grief. And yet the pendant existed, worn by a child whose mother was dead. The same pendant his daughter had worn. The morning passed with excruciating slowness. The breakfast crowd came and went. Truckers stopping for eggs and coffee. Local workers grabbing something quick before their shifts. A family with young children who reminded Jack painfully of Emma and her friends. He helped May where he could, clearing tables, refilling coffee, needing to stay busy to avoid drowning in his own thoughts. She accepted his assistance without comment, understanding that he needed the distraction. At 11:30, Jack positioned himself at the counter where he could watch the door without being obvious about it. His coffee had gone cold, but he held the cup anyway, needing something for his hands to do. Noon came and went. Then 12:15, 12:30. Maybe Dorothy wasn't coming today. Maybe she'd changed her routine. Maybe May had gotten the day wrong. Then at 12:45, the door opened and a woman in her 70s stepped inside. She wore a floral print dress and sensible shoes, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a large purse over one shoulder and walked with the careful precision of someone whose joints didn't work quite like they used to. May greeted her warmly. "Dorothy, your usual booth?" "Please, dear." Dorothy's voice was soft but clear, carrying the accent of someone who'd lived in the South for many years. She settled into the corner booth, and May brought her water without asking. They exchanged a few pleasantries, the kind of easy conversation that comes from years of weekly interactions. Then May returned to the kitchen, leaving Dorothy alone with her menu. This was the moment. Jack knew if he hesitated, he'd talk himself out of it. He'd convince himself that this was intrusive, inappropriate, that he should let the past stay buried where it belonged. But he'd spent 15 years running from the past, and it had never stayed buried. It followed him everywhere, a shadow he couldn't escape. Maybe it was time to turn and face it. He stood, his legs feeling more steady than they had the day before, and walked to Dorothy's booth. She looked up as he approached, her expression curious but not unwelcoming. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jack began, his throat dry. "My name is Jack Reeves. May said you might be willing to talk to me about something." Dorothy's eyes, a sharp blue despite her age, assessed him with the kind of quick judgment that comes from a lifetime of reading people. "May said that, did she? Well, have a seat then, Mr. Reeves. Can't say I'm not intrigued." Jack slid into the booth across from her, suddenly uncertain how to begin. "Where did you start when asking about impossibilities?" "I met your granddaughter yesterday," he said. "Emma, she and her friends were playing near my motorcycle." Dorothy's expression softened immediately. "That sounds like Emma. She's got more curiosity than sense sometimes." "I hope she wasn't bothering you." "Not at all. She's a delightful child." Jack paused, gathering courage. "But something happened that I can't quite explain. Something that's been keeping me up at night." "Go on." "Emma was wearing a necklace, a silver pendant with a specific design on it, a geometric pattern." Jack pulled out his phone, an old model that barely functioned, and scrolled through his photos until he found one of Sarah. It was from her 16th birthday, the day he'd given her the necklace. She was smiling at the camera, the pendant clearly visible. He turned the phone to show Dorothy. "This is my daughter, Sarah. She died 15 years ago in a car accident. I had that necklace custom-made for her from a design she drew. The jeweler guaranteed it was one of a kind." Dorothy took the phone, her hands surprisingly steady. She looked at the photo for a long moment, then back at Jack, then at the photo again. Her face had gone pale. "Dear Lord," she whispered. "The pendant Emma is wearing looks identical," Jack continued. "Same design, same everything. I know how crazy this sounds, but I need to understand how that's possible." Dorothy set the phone down carefully, as if it might break. She folded her hands on the table, and Jack noticed they were trembling slightly. "Mr. Reeves," she said quietly, "I think you'd better tell me everything about your daughter. When she died, where all of it?" The request caught Jack off guard. He'd expected questions about the necklace, about the design, maybe skepticism about his claims. But Dorothy's reaction suggested something else entirely. She knew something, or suspected something. "She was 17, Jack began, the familiar pain settling in his chest. "November 14th, 2010. We were living in Alamogordo, New Mexico. She was driving home from a friend's house. Drunk driver crossed the center line. She died instantly." Dorothy's face had gone from pale to ashen. She reached for her water glass with shaking hands and took a long drink. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Jack asked, concerned. "Just give me a moment." She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. When she opened them again, there was a mixture of emotions Jack couldn't quite read. Shock, sadness, something that looked almost like recognition. "Mr. Reeves, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. But I swear to you on my daughter's grave that it's the truth." Jack's heart began to pound. "I'm listening. My daughter Claire, Emma's mother. She came to Dust Creek 9 years ago with a 3-month-old baby. She never told me who the father was. Never talked about her life before. Said she needed a fresh start and wanted to leave the past behind." Dorothy paused, her eyes meeting Jack's directly. "But she did tell me one thing. She said Emma's middle name was Sarah, not because she liked the name, but because it meant something important. Because Emma needed to carry that name forward." The information hit Jack like a physical blow. Emma Sarah Thornton. Is Sarah's name, carried forward by a child who wore her necklace. "I don't understand," Jack said, though pieces were beginning to click together in ways that made his head spin. "Neither did I," Dorothy admitted. "For years I wondered. Claire was so secretive about Emma's father. She'd change the subject every time I asked. Eventually I stopped asking. Figured she had her reasons, and they were hers to keep. But the necklace, Dorothy repeated. "Claire wore it herself for years. I asked her about it once. She said it was a gift from someone important. Someone she'd lost. I assumed it meant a man, maybe Emma's father. But now, seeing your photo," she trailed off, the implications too large to voice easily. Jack's mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last. Could Claire have been in the car with Sarah? Could she have somehow survived when Sarah didn't? But that made no sense. The accident report had been thorough. Only 2 vehicles involved. Only 2 people. One drunk driver who walked away with minor injuries. One teenage girl who didn't. Where was Claire from? Jack asked. "Before she came here?" "She never said exactly. Somewhere in New Mexico. I gathered from little things she'd let slip. But she was careful, almost paranoid about her past. New Mexico, the same state where Sarah died. The coincidences were piling up, each one statistically improbable, together forming a pattern that defied rational explanation. Did Claire have any identification?" Jack pressed. "Birth certificate? Driver's license?" "Of course. Everything was legal. She was Claire Thornton, born in Albuquerque, 1988. I saw her documents when she moved in, when we set up bank accounts for her and Emma, Albuquerque. Less than an hour from Alamogordo. The threads were pulling tighter, connecting in ways that both clarified and confused. "Mrs. Thornton," Jack said carefully, "is there any possibility that Claire and Sarah knew each other? That they might have been friends?" Dorothy considered this. "How old was your Sarah when she died?" 17. "Would have been 18 2 months later. Then she would have been 26 when Claire came here with Emma, if they were the same age. Dorothy shook her head slowly. I suppose it's possible they knew each other when they were younger. But that still doesn't explain how Claire ended up with Sarah's necklace, unless Sarah had given it to her. Unless, in the hours or days before the accident, Sarah had passed the necklace to a friend for safekeeping. But why would she do that? And why would that friend then name her daughter after Sarah years later? The questions multiplied faster than answers could form. I need to see Claire's things, Jack said. Her documents, her personal belongings, anything that might help me understand this connection. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. Mr. Reeves, I understand you're looking for answers, but Emma has been through so much already. Losing her mother was devastating. She's just starting to find some stability, some peace. I won't do anything that might upset that balance. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, Jack said, echoing his words to May. But that necklace, Mrs. Thornton, it belonged to my daughter. However, it ended up with your daughter. However any of this happened, I have a right to understand. Do you? Dorothy's voice was gentle but firm. Or is this about you needing closure? Because closure that comes at the expense of a grieving child's well-being isn't closure worth having. The words stung because they held truth. Jack wanted answers desperately, but at what cost? Emma had lost her mother. She was wearing a necklace that clearly meant something to her, connected her to memories of the woman who'd raised her. What right did he have to potentially shatter whatever meaning that necklace held for her? I just want to know how my daughter's necklace ended up here, Jack said quietly. That's all. I'm not trying to take it back. I'm not trying to insert myself into your family. I just need to understand. Dorothy's expression softened slightly. Claire kept boxes in the attic. Her personal things. I haven't gone through most of them. Couldn't bring myself to after she died. But maybe there's something there that could answer your questions. Would you let me look? On one condition. Dorothy's voice took on steel. Emma doesn't need to know about this, not yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. She's been asking questions about her mother, about her father, about where she comes from. I've been giving her honest answers when I can, and protecting her when I can't. Whatever we find in those boxes, we handle it carefully. Jack nodded. I agree completely. Then come by the house tomorrow. 2:00. Emma will be at a friend's house until 5. Dorothy wrote her address on a napkin and slid it across the table. Jack took the napkin, folding it carefully and placing it in his wallet. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. Don't thank me yet. We might find nothing. Or we might find things that raise more questions than they answer. She picked up her menu, though her hands were still shaking slightly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to order my lunch and try to wrap my head around all of this. Jack stood, understanding the dismissal. 2:00 tomorrow. 2:00, she confirmed. He returned to the counter, his mind spinning. May raised her eyebrows questioningly, but he shook his head. Not now. He'd fill her in later, when he had more information, when the pieces fit together in ways he could articulate. The afternoon stretched ahead of him, 24 hours that would feel like an eternity. 24 hours to wonder what they'd find in those boxes. 24 hours to prepare himself for answers that might hurt as much as they healed. But at least he was moving forward. At least he was doing something other than running. For the first time in 15 years, Jack Reeves was standing still and facing the past head-on. The hours until 2:00 the next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jack spent them trying to occupy his mind with mundane tasks, helping May with small repairs around the diner, walking the perimeter of Dust Creek until he'd memorized every street and storefront. But nothing could truly distract him from the questions circling his thoughts like vultures. Thompson's garage called with an update. The part for his Harley had arrived, and they could have it fixed by end of day. Jack authorized the work, but didn't feel the usual relief that came with knowing he could move on. For the first time in years, the road didn't call to him. Something was anchoring him here, pulling him toward answers he both desperately wanted and deeply feared. That night he dreamed of Sarah. Not the nightmare replays of the accident that usually haunted him, but memory dreams. Sarah at 12, learning to ride a bike without training wheels, her face determined and fearless. Sarah at 14, arguing with him about curfew with teenage passion and surprising logic. Sarah at 16, opening the blue-wrapped box that contained the necklace, her eyes lighting up with pure joy. "It's perfect, Dad," she'd said, fastening it around her neck immediately. "I'm never taking it off." And she hadn't. Not until death took it from her. Jack woke before dawn, his face wet with tears he didn't remember crying. He lay in the darkness of May's back room, feeling the weight of 15 years pressed down on him. 15 years of running. 15 years of avoiding anything that reminded him of what he'd lost. 15 years of existing without really living. Maybe it was time for that to change. At precisely 2 o'clock, Jack stood on the porch of a modest house on Sycamore Street. The home was well maintained, with flower boxes in the windows, and a lawn that showed evidence of regular care. A child's bicycle leaned against the garage, pink with white streamers on the handlebars. Emma's, he assumed. Dorothy answered on his second knock. She looked older in the daylight filtering through her door, the lines on her face deeper, but her eyes were clear and determined. "Mr. Reeves, right on time. Thank you for doing this." She ushered him inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and old wood, homey and lived in. Photographs lined the hallway, chronicling lives Jack didn't know. A young woman who must have been Claire. Emma at various ages, growing from infant to the child he'd met. Dorothy herself, with a man who was presumably her late husband. "Coffee?" Dorothy offered. "No, thank you." She led him upstairs to a narrow hallway and pulled down a ladder that accessed the attic. "Watch your head." The ceilings low in places. The attic was exactly what Jack expected. Dusty, warm despite the October chill outside, filled with the accumulated belongings of a family's history. Boxes were stacked along one wall, some labeled, others anonymous. Christmas decorations occupied one corner. Old furniture that was too good to throw away, but no longer needed filled another. Dorothy pointed to 3 boxes stacked together, separated slightly from the others. "Those were Claire's. I moved them up here after she died. Couldn't bear to go through them. Couldn't bear to throw them away." Jack approached the boxes as if they might explode. In a way, they might. Whatever was inside could shatter his understanding of reality or provide answers that made sense of the impossible. "I'll be downstairs," Dorothy said. "Take your time. If you need anything, call down." Then she was gone, leaving Jack alone with his daughter's past and a stranger's secrets. He knelt beside the first box, his knees protesting the hard wooden floor. The cardboard was worn, the tape yellowed with age. Someone, presumably Claire, had written "personal" on the side in neat handwriting. Jack carefully peeled back the tape and opened the flaps. Inside was a life. Journals, photographs, letters, a small wooden box that rattled when he lifted it. A manila folder thick with documents. The accumulated evidence of a person's existence preserved in cardboard and hope that someone, someday, would care enough to look. He started with the photographs. They were organized in envelopes by year, carefully labeled. 2007, 2008, 2009. Jack opened the 2010 envelope with trembling hands. November 14th, 2010, the day Sarah died. The first photo showed a group of teenagers at what looked like a party, balloons, a cake, smiling faces caught in that moment before adulthood really hits, when the world still feels full of infinite possibility. And there in the back row, arm around another girl's shoulders, was Sarah. Jack's breath caught in his throat. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the photograph. But there was no mistaking it. His daughter, alive in this frozen moment, smiling at the camera with her whole heart, wearing the necklace he'd given her. And the girl, whose shoulder she had her arm around, the one looking up at Sarah with obvious affection, was a younger version of the woman in Dorothy's hallway photographs. Claire. They'd known each other. They'd been friends. Close friends by the look of it. Jack flipped through the rest of the photos with growing understanding. Sarah and Claire at the mall. Sarah and Claire at the movies. Sarah and Claire studying together, books spread across a table. Image after image of a friendship Jack had never known about, a relationship Sarah had never mentioned. Why wouldn't she have told him about Claire? Jack racked his memory, trying to recall if Sarah had ever mentioned that name. But the year before her death was fuzzy in his mind, colored by his own struggles. He'd been working double shifts to save money for her college fund, coming home exhausted, missing dinners, trusting that Sarah was responsible enough to manage her own social life. He'd missed this. He'd missed knowing about this friendship, about this girl who'd clearly meant something to his daughter. The guilt hit him like a wave. What else had he missed? What other parts of Sarah's life had he been too busy or too tired to notice? Jack set the photographs aside and reached for the journals. There were 5 of them, spiral-bound notebooks with worn covers. He opened the first, dated from 2009. Claire's handwriting was neat, almost obsessively so. The entries started mundane. School complaints, friend drama, normal teenage concerns. But as Jack read further, a pattern emerged. Claire wrote a lot about one friend in particular, about someone who understood her, someone who made her feel less alone, Sarah. "She's the first person who's ever really listened to me," Claire had written in March of 2009. "Everyone else sees what they want to see. My parents see a perfect daughter. My other friends see someone to party with. But Sarah sees me, the real me. And she doesn't judge." Jack's eyes burned as he read entry after entry. Sarah had been important to Claire in ways he'd never known. She'd been a confidant, a support, a genuine friend in a way that seemed rare and precious. Then he reached the entries from November 2010. The handwriting changed, became erratic, desperate. The words ran together in places, smudged by what could only have been tears. "Sarah's dead. I can't believe I'm writing those words, but they're true. She's dead and it's my fault. It's all my fault." Jack's hands froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. He forced himself to keep reading, though part of him wanted to close the journal and never look back. "She was coming to pick me up. I called her crying, begging her to come get me from that party. I was drunk and scared and I needed her. And she came. Of course she came. That's who Sarah was. She always came when someone needed her." The words swam before Jack's eyes. His daughter, driving in the rain, going to help a friend. The police say it was the other driver's fault, that there was nothing Sarah could have done. But if I hadn't called, if I'd just handled my own problems instead of depending on her, if I'd been stronger, better, less needy, she'd still be alive. Jack had to stop reading. He set the journal down carefully, afraid he might tear it apart if his grip tightened any further. His breath came in short, painful gasps. The attic felt too small, too warm, suffocating. Sarah had been going to help Claire. That's why she was on that road at that time in that weather. Not coming home from a friend's house like the police had told him. Going to rescue someone who needed her. All these years he'd thought she died for no reason, a random victim of a drunk driver's carelessness. But there had been a reason, a purpose to her final journey. She'd been doing what she did best, being there for someone who needed her. The knowledge didn't make her death any less tragic. But somehow it made it more Sarah, more in keeping with who she'd been as a person. Jack picked up the journal again, his hands steadier now, and continued reading. "I took her necklace from the hospital. They were going to give it to her father with her other belongings, but I couldn't let them. I couldn't let him have it. I know that's wrong. I know it's stealing, but it's all I have left of her. This necklace and my memories and this crushing guilt that will never go away. So that's how it happened." Claire had taken the necklace, not maliciously but out of grief and guilt and desperate need for connection. She'd stolen a piece of Jack's daughter, keeping it hidden all these years. Jack should have been angry. Part of him was. But mostly, he felt a bone-deep sadness for this girl who'd carried such enormous guilt, who'd blamed herself for an accident that wasn't her fault, who'd lived with that weight for years. He continued through the journal, watching Claire's grief evolve. She wrote about therapy, about depression, about her parents not understanding, about feeling like she was drowning. Then in March of 2011, a new entry. "I'm pregnant." Jack's world tilted again. He read on, desperate for context. "I don't even know how to process this. After everything that's happened, after months of barely functioning, Now there's going to be a baby. My baby. She didn't name the father. Barely mentioned him at all, except to note that he wasn't going to be involved, that she was on her own. But then, 2 entries later, I'm going to name her Sarah. I know that probably seems wrong to some people, but I need to do this. I need Sarah's name to continue. I need something good to come from all this tragedy. This baby will carry Sarah's name forward into the world, and maybe that will mean something. Maybe that will help balance the scales. Jack closed his eyes, letting this sink in. Emma Sarah Thornton, named deliberately, purposefully, as a tribute to his daughter, as a way to keep Sarah's memory alive. Claire hadn't known Jack would ever find out. She'd moved away from New Mexico, changed her life, started over in a town where nobody knew her history. She'd been protecting Emma from the weight of guilt she carried, giving her daughter a fresh start while still honoring the friend she'd lost. There was nobility in that, Jack realized, a kind of beautiful tragedy. He set aside the journals and opened the manila folder. Inside were documents, birth certificates, medical records, and tucked in the back a letter. The envelope was addressed to Emma in Claire's handwriting. "To be opened when you're old enough to understand," it read on the outside. Jack stared at the letter. This wasn't his to read. This was between Claire and her daughter, a message from beyond the grave. Opening it would be a violation of privacy, of trust. But it might also hold answers. And Dorothy had given him permission to look through everything. He carefully opened the envelope. The letter was dated 6 months before Claire's death, written in the same neat handwriting as the journals, but with the shaky quality of someone very ill. "My dearest Emma," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry for that. Sorry I can't be there to watch you grow up, to help you navigate this complicated world, to answer all the questions I know you must have." Jack read on, his eyes moving over words meant for a daughter from her dying mother. "There are things I need to tell you. Things about your name, about where you come from, about the choices I made. Your middle name is Sarah, and that's not an accident. It's a tribute to the best person I ever knew." Claire went on to tell the story, meeting Sarah in high school, their friendship, the night of the accident, the guilt and the grief and the years of trying to move forward while carrying an impossible weight. "I took something that didn't belong to me," Claire wrote. "A necklace that was your namesake's. I've worn it all these years, and now I'm giving it to you. Not because I have a right to, but because I want you to carry Sarah forward. I want you to know that you're named after someone brave and kind and good. Someone who died trying to help someone in need. Someone who made the world better just by being in it." The letter continued with practical matters, advice about life, expressions of love. But Jack's eyes kept returning to that paragraph about the necklace. Claire had known it was wrong to keep it, had known she was holding something that belonged to Jack, but she'd kept it anyway, transforming it from evidence of theft into a legacy gift. Jack felt tears running down his face. For Sarah, for Claire, for Emma, who'd lost a mother who loved her deeply, for Dorothy, who'd lost a daughter, for all the ways grief connected people across time and circumstance. He carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. This was Emma's now. When she was old enough, Dorothy could give it to her, and she'd understand the weight of what she carried around her neck. But Jack knew something else now. Something important. Claire had never intended to hurt him. She'd been a broken teenager making decisions out of grief and desperation. She'd been trying to survive, to honor a friend, to create meaning from tragedy, and in doing so, she'd created Emma, a child who carried Sarah's name, who wore Sarah's necklace, who was, in a strange and beautiful way, proof that Sarah's life had mattered, that her kindness had ripples that extended beyond her death. Jack sat in that dusty attic, surrounded by the evidence of lives intertwined by fate and tragedy, and felt something shift inside him. The anger he'd carried for 15 years, the resentment at the universe for taking his daughter, the bitter refusal to see goodness in a world that had been so cruel. It was softening, not disappearing entirely, but transforming into something he could carry more easily. Sarah was gone. That would never stop hurting. But she hadn't died for nothing. She died being exactly who she was, helping someone who needed her. And in her death, she'd inspired someone to create new life, to carry her name forward, to keep her memory alive in ways Jack never could have imagined. There was comfort in that. Small, fragile comfort, but real nonetheless. He gathered the journals and letter, returned them carefully to the box, and made his way downstairs to tell Dorothy what he'd found. Dorothy was sitting in her living room when Jack came down, a cup of tea cooling on the side table beside her. She looked up as he entered, her expression carefully neutral, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. Jack sat down across from her, the journals and letter still in his hands. "Yes and no. I found answers, but they led to more questions. That's usually how it works." He told her everything. About the photographs showing Sarah and Claire's friendship. About the journal entries revealing that Sarah had been on her way to help Claire the night she died. About Claire taking the necklace and carrying guilt she shouldn't have borne. About the letter intended for Emma explaining it all. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her face showing little emotion until Jack finished. Then she closed her eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. "I suspected," she said finally. "Not all of it, not the details. But I knew Claire was carrying something heavy, some secret that ate at her. I thought it was about Emma's father, about some relationship that ended badly. I never imagined it was this. Claire wasn't at fault," Jack said firmly. "The drunk driver was at fault. Sarah made her own choice to go help a friend. That's who she was. Claire shouldn't have blamed herself. Try telling that to a 17-year-old girl who just lost her best friend." Dorothy's voice was gentle, but pointed. "Logic doesn't work on grief. You of all people should know that." She was right. Jack had spent 15 years knowing logically that Sarah's death wasn't his fault, that he couldn't have prevented it, that being at work instead of home that night didn't make him responsible. But logic hadn't stopped him from carrying guilt anyway. "What do we do now?" Jack asked. "About Emma, about the letter." "About all of this." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Emma asks about her mother constantly. Who she was, where she came from, why her father isn't around. I've been trying to give her age-appropriate answers, but she's getting older. Soon she'll want more." The letter Claire wrote. "It's meant for her. When she's old enough to understand, yes." Dorothy met Jack's eyes. "But here's what I'm wondering, Mr. Reeves. Are you going to want to be part of that conversation?" The question hung in the air between them. Jack hadn't thought beyond finding answers. He hadn't considered what happened next, what role he might play in this tangled story. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to tell Emma about Sarah, about who she was named after, about the friendship that meant so much to both girls. But another part of me worries that's selfish, that it would be putting my needs above Emma's well-being. Or," Dorothy said carefully, "it could be giving Emma something precious, a connection to her mother's past. Stories about the person who meant enough to Claire that she named her only daughter after her." She paused. "Emma needs to know she comes from somewhere, that her name means something, that there's history and love and complicated beauty behind who she is." Jack felt his throat tighten. "I'm not good with children. Haven't been around them since Sarah died. You seemed to do fine when Emma and her friends were playing with your motorcycle." "That was different. That was before I knew." "Before you knew what? That she's connected to your daughter? That she's carrying Sarah's name?" Dorothy leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, I watched you yesterday from the window. You were kind to those children, patient, you made them laugh. Whatever barriers you think you've built around yourself, they're not as solid as you believe." Jack wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because somewhere in the past 24 hours something had changed. The wall he'd constructed between himself and the rest of humanity had developed cracks. Light was seeping through, and it scared him almost as much as the darkness had. "I don't know if I can do this," he said quietly. "Nobody knows if they can do hard things until they try," Dorothy replied. "But I'll tell you what I think. I think Emma could benefit from knowing someone who knew the woman she's named after. I think you could benefit from seeing how Sarah's legacy continues in this world." And I think Claire, wherever she is, would be grateful that the two of you found each other." Before Jack could respond, a sound came from outside. Children's voices, laughter. The front door burst open and Emma rushed in, her cheeks flushed from playing, her ponytail even more disheveled than before. She stopped short when she saw Jack, recognition flickering across her face. "You're the motorcycle man." "I am," Jack confirmed, his heart suddenly racing. "Is your bike fixed yet? Did my repairs work?" She grinned, remembering her theatrical performance from the day before. "Actually, they did. Runs perfectly now." Emma beamed with pride, completely unaware of the weight of the moment. Dorothy stood, moving to her granddaughter's side and resting a hand on her shoulder. "Emma, this is Mr. Reeves. He's a friend who's visiting. Would you like to say a proper hello?" Emma stuck out her hand with formal seriousness. "Nice to officially meet you, Mr. Reeves. I'm Emma Sarah Thornton." Jack took her small hand in his weathered one, feeling the contact like an electric current. "It's very nice to officially meet you, Emma Sarah Thornton. That's a beautiful name." "My middle name is after someone important," Emma said, pulling her hand back and unconsciously touching the pendant at her neck. "My mom told me that, but she didn't tell me who." Jack glanced at Dorothy, who gave him the slightest nod. Permission, invitation, trust. "Your middle name," Jack began, choosing his words carefully, "is after someone who was very special. Someone who was kind and brave and loved helping people." Emma's eyes widened. "Did you know her? The person I'm named after?" "I did. Very well, actually. What was she like?" Jack felt 15 years of grief and 15 minutes of hope collide in his chest. What was Sarah like? How could he possibly distill his daughter's essence into words a 9-year-old could understand? "She was a lot like you, actually," he said finally. "Curious, bold. She liked fixing things, solving problems. She made people laugh. Did she die?" Emma asked, with the directness children sometimes have about death. "She did. A long time ago. But she died doing something good, helping a friend who needed her." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this. "My mom died too, 6 months ago." "I know. I'm very sorry. Everyone says that. But you know what? I think the people who die helping others are really brave. That's what my grandma says, that they're heroes." Jack's vision blurred, out of the mouths of children. This 9-year-old girl, wearing his daughter's necklace, carrying his daughter's name, had just given him a gift he'd been searching for 15 years to find. Sarah was a hero, not a victim, not a tragedy, not a cautionary tale about the dangers of driving in bad weather. A hero who died doing exactly what she believed in. "Your grandmother is absolutely right," Jack managed to say. Emma smiled, then looked between Jack and Dorothy with sudden suspicion. "Are you two going to be friends?" "Because Grandma doesn't have many friends, and I think she could use more." Dorothy laughed, surprised. "Emma, what?" "It's true. All your friends are old. Mr. Reeves is old too, but he's cool. He has a motorcycle." "I'm not sure cool is the word I'd use," Jack said, finding himself smiling despite everything. "Definitely cool," Emma insisted. "Can you stay for dinner? Grandma's making pot roast and there's always too much. She says I eat like a bird, even though I don't think birds actually eat very much, compared to their size." Jack looked at Dorothy, who shrugged with an expression that said she'd been expertly manipulated by her granddaughter before, and would be again. "I'd be honored," Jack said. "Excellent. I'm going to wash my hands. Grandma says I always track in half the playground." Emma bounded toward the bathroom, her energy filling the entire house. Dorothy and Jack sat in silence for a moment after she left. "She's remarkable," Jack said finally. "She is," Dorothy agreed. "Just like the person she's named after, I suspect." And in that moment, sitting in a stranger's living room, in a town he'd stumbled into by accident, Jack Reeves felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. He felt like he'd come home, not to a place, not to a building, but to a purpose, to a connection. To a reason to stop running and start living again. The twist wasn't that Emma was connected to Sarah. The twist was that in finding Emma, Jack had found a way back to himself. Dinner at Dorothy's house was a revelation. Jack hadn't sat at a family table in 15 years. hadn't participated in the simple rituals of passing dishes and discussing the day. Emma chatted constantly, bouncing between topics with the effortless energy of childhood. She told stories about school, her friends, a book she was reading about a girl detective. Dorothy watched it all with grandmotherly affection, occasionally steering the conversation when Emma veered too far into tangents. And Jack found himself participating, drawn in despite his long isolation, answering Emma's endless questions about motorcycles and the places he'd traveled. "Have you been to the Grand Canyon?" Emma asked around a mouthful of pot roast. "Several times." "What about Yellowstone?" "Twice." "Alaska?" "Not yet. That's still on my list." "You should go. My friend Madison's cousin went and saw bears and everything." Emma's eyes lit up. "Maybe you could send me postcards from the places you visit. I have a map in my room where I put postcards, but I only have 3 so far because nobody I know travels anywhere interesting." The casual assumption that Jack would send postcards, that their connection would continue beyond this meal, caught him off guard. He glanced at Dorothy, who was carefully not looking at him, focusing on her own plate. "I'd be happy to send you postcards," Jack heard himself say. "Really? That would be so cool." Emma bounced in her seat. "And you have to write on them. Not just your name. Tell me about what you see and what it's like." "I can do that." After dinner, while Dorothy cleared the dishes, Emma grabbed Jack's hand and dragged him to her room to show him her postcard map. The bedroom was exactly what he'd expect from a 9-year-old girl. Books everywhere, drawings taped to the walls, a desk covered in art supplies and homework, and on one wall, a large map of the United States with 3 postcards pinned to different locations. "This one's from my teacher who went to Florida," Emma explained, pointing to each in turn. "This one's from my grandma's friend who went to Boston. And this one's from my mom before she got too sick to travel. She went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, not far from where Sarah died." Jack felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but pushed through it. "This is a great collection. We'll add to it." "You really mean it? You're not just saying that to be nice?" Jack met her eyes, seeing hope and vulnerability in equal measure. "I really mean it." Emma smiled, then looked down at her feet. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. The person I'm named after, Sarah, were you related to her?" The question was inevitable. Emma was bright, perceptive. She'd picked up on the emotional undercurrents, even if she didn't fully understand them. Jack chose his words carefully. "She was my daughter." Emma's head snapped up. "Your daughter? So that means I'm named after your daughter?" "Yes." "Was she friends with my mom?" "She was. Very good friends." Emma processed this, her young mind working through implications. "Is that why you looked so weird when you saw my necklace? Because it reminded you of her?" "Something like that. I'm sorry she died." Emma's voice was soft, sincere. "It must be really hard. My mom died and it's the hardest thing ever. I can't imagine how hard it would be to lose your kid." The simple empathy from this child nearly undid Jack. He had to clear his throat before he could speak. "It was very hard. Still is sometimes. But meeting you, learning about how you got your name, it helps. It makes me feel like Sarah's memory is being honored. My mom always said names are important, that they connect us to people and places and stories." Emma touched her necklace. "This was my mom's. She gave it to me before she died. Said it was special." "It is special. Very special. Did Sarah have one like it?" Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. "That's so cool that they both had the same necklace, like they were connected." If only Emma knew how connected. But that was a story for another day, when she was older, when she could understand the full weight of what she carried. Dorothy appeared in the doorway. "Emma, it's getting late. Time to start your bedtime routine. But Grandma, Mr. Reeves is telling me about Sarah, and I'm sure he'll tell you more another time. But right now, you need to brush your teeth and get ready for bed." Emma groaned with theatrical suffering, but complied, giving Jack an impulsive hug before disappearing into the bathroom. The gesture was so natural, so unconsciously affectionate, that Jack stood frozen for a moment before returning to the living room. Dorothy was making tea when he entered the kitchen. She glanced at him with a knowing smile. "She's decided she likes you. The feeling is mutual, Be careful, Mr. Reeves. Emma gets attached quickly, and when people leave, it hurts her. The warning was gentle but clear. Jack had wandered into these people's lives by accident. He had a choice now. Walk away, climb on his Harley, and return to the rootless existence he'd maintained for 15 years. Or stay, become part of this unexpected family, and risk all the vulnerability that came with caring about people again. "I'm not planning to leave," Jack said. "Not permanently, anyway. What about your travels? The open road? You told Emma you'd send postcards, which implies you'll be moving on eventually." Jack sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of the decision settling on him. "I've been running for 15 years. Maybe it's time to stop, or at least to have somewhere to come back to." Dorothy set a cup of tea in front of him and sat down across the table. "You barely know us. I know enough. Emma needs people in her life. You need help raising her. And I need a reason to be something other than a man on a bike with no destination. This isn't charity, Mr. Reeves. We're not a project for you to fix." "I don't think you need fixing. I think maybe I do." The honesty hung between them. Dorothy studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing, measuring, judging whether he was sincere or simply caught up in emotional momentum. "If you're going to be part of Emma's life," she said finally, "you need to be reliable. That child has lost enough. I won't let her lose anyone else." "I understand. Do you?" "Because it's easy to make promises. Much harder to keep them when things get difficult. When the grief comes back. When the road calls and staying put feels too hard." Jack met her gaze steadily. "I've run from my grief for 15 years. It hasn't gotten me anywhere except alone. Maybe it's time to try something different." Dorothy's expression softened slightly. "What would you even do here? Dust Creek doesn't offer much in terms of employment opportunities. I worked construction before. I can do repairs, building work, whatever needs doing. People always need help with something. You'd really consider staying here? In this nowhere town? I've been to a lot of places, Mrs. Thornton. Most of them were just as nowhere. The difference is this place has something worth staying for." Before Dorothy could respond, Emma called from upstairs. "Grandma, can you come tuck me in?" "Be right there." Dorothy stood, then paused. "Think about this carefully, Mr. Reeves. Don't make decisions based on emotion or guilt or some misplaced sense of obligation to my daughter. Emma deserves better than that. She deserves someone who cares about her. I think I could be that person. Could be or are." Jack thought about Emma's smile, her energy, the way she'd unself-consciously taken his hand. The way talking to her had felt natural, despite his years of isolation. The way her connection to Sarah made him feel less like he was betraying his daughter's memory by moving forward. He said firmly. Dorothy nodded slowly. "Then we'll talk more tomorrow. After you've had a night to sleep on it. After the emotion of today has had time to settle." She left to attend to Emma, and Jack sat alone in the kitchen, his tea cooling beside him. Through the ceiling, he could hear Dorothy's muffled voice reading a bedtime story, Emma's occasional questions and comments. The sounds of a family, a home, a life. It had been so long since he'd been part of anything like this. So long since he'd had routines and responsibilities and people depending on him. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from May. "Thompson says your bike is ready. Anytime you want to pick it up." Jack stared at the message. His Harley was fixed. He could leave, return to the road, the wind, the constant movement that had defined his existence for so long. But for the first time since Sarah died, leaving felt like the wrong choice. He typed a response. "Thanks. I'll get it tomorrow. Might be sticking around town for a while, though." May's reply came quickly. "That's so, Dust Creek growing on you?" "Something like that. Well, if you need work, I could use some help fixing things around the diner. Roof leaks, backdoor sticks, about 100 other things I've been putting off. I'd be happy to help." "Good. Also, there's a small apartment above the diner. Previous tenant moved out last month. Nothing fancy, but it's furnished and the rent's cheap. Yours if you want it." Jack read the message 3 times. Was this the universe opening doors? Or was he reading meaning into coincidence, seeing signs because he wanted them to be there? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe sometimes you just had to trust that good things could happen, even after years of tragedy. "I'll take it," he texted back. "Starting when?" Jack looked around Dorothy's kitchen, heard the sounds of bedtime upstairs, felt the unfamiliar warmth of being part of something again. "Starting now." When Dorothy came back downstairs, Jack was still sitting at the table, but something had shifted in his posture. He looked less like a man passing through and more like someone preparing to stay. "I found a place to live," he told her. "Apartment above May's diner. I'm going to take some repair work there, see what else I can find in town." Dorothy didn't look surprised. "So you're serious about this?" "I am." "Then I suppose we should set some ground rules about your involvement with Emma. Make sure we're both clear about expectations and boundaries." "I'd appreciate that." They talked until late into the night, laying the foundation for something neither of them had expected. A family forged not by blood, but by loss and hope, and the strange ways life connects people who need each other. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Dust Creek like a familiar blanket, bringing cold nights and the occasional snow that never quite stuck. Jack established routines he hadn't had in years. He woke early, helped May with morning prep at the diner, then spent his days doing repairs around town. Word spread that he was reliable, skilled, and reasonably priced. Work came steadily. The apartment above the diner was small but sufficient. 1 room, a kitchenette, a bathroom that worked most of the time. Jack furnished it simply. A bed, a table, a chair. On the wall he hung a single photograph of Sarah, the only one he'd kept all these years. But most evenings he found himself at Dorothy's house, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to help Emma with homework or to hear about her day. She'd adopted him with the easy acceptance children have, treating him like a fixture in her life, like he'd always been there. Dorothy remained cautiously welcoming. She appreciated his help with Emma, his reliability, his genuine care for her granddaughter. But Jack could sense her watching, waiting to see if he'd prove solid or if he'd eventually disappoint. He was determined not to disappoint. Then came February 14th, Valentine's Day, which Jack had ignored for 15 years. But Emma's school was having a party, and she'd been buzzing with excitement for weeks. "We're supposed to bring someone special if we want," she told Jack over dinner the night before. "Like a parent or grandparent or someone like that." "Grandma can't come because she has a doctor's appointment. But maybe you could come, if you want to, I mean. It's okay if you don't want to. I just thought maybe you'd like to see what my classroom looks like and meet my teacher and stuff." The invitation was casual, but Jack heard the hope underneath. The desire to have someone there, to not be the only kid without family present. "I'd be honored," Jack said. Emma's face lit up. "Really? That's so great. Mrs. Patterson says we're having heart-shaped cookies and punch, and there's going to be games. It's going to be so fun." The next day, Jack found himself walking into Dust Creek Elementary, feeling wildly out of place. The classroom was decorated with pink and red hearts, streamers, and children's artwork covering every available surface. Emma grabbed his hand the moment he arrived and dragged him around, introducing him to everyone. "This is Mr. Reeves. He's my friend who has a motorcycle. This is my teacher, Mrs. Patterson. This is Tyler and Madison and Sam. Remember them?" Jack shook small hands, answered questions from curious children and slightly suspicious parents. But Emma's obvious pride in having him there made any awkwardness worthwhile. During the party, while children played games and ate cookies, Emma pulled Jack aside to show him a project she'd been working on. A family tree with hand-drawn branches and leaves containing names and relationships. "See, here's me," Emma pointed to a leaf at the bottom. "And here's Mom, and here's Grandma and Grandpa, who died before I was born." Jack traced the branches with his eyes, seeing the gaps where Emma's father should be, where extended family might exist, but apparently didn't. "And I added you," Emma said shyly, pointing to a leaf she'd drawn recently in brighter marker. "I didn't know where you should go exactly, so I put you here." The leaf was connected to her mother's branch, labeled Mom's Friend's Dad, and then a line extending to Emma labeled My Friend. The label was imperfect, the connection awkward on the page. But the meaning was clear. Emma had made space for him in her understanding of family. "This is wonderful," Jack managed to say, his throat tight. "Mrs. Patterson said families come in all shapes, that it doesn't have to be just mom and dad and kids. It can be whoever loves you and takes care of you." Emma looked up at him. "You count, right?" "I'd like to think so." "Good." Emma seemed satisfied with this confirmation and moved on to show him the next project, a valentine she'd made for her grandmother. But Jack stayed rooted in place, staring at that family tree, at the leaf with his name on it, at the physical representation of the fact that he belonged somewhere, meant something to someone, mattered in a way he hadn't in 15 years. He'd spent so long convinced that moving forward meant betraying Sarah, that finding new connections meant forgetting her, that loving anyone else diminished what he'd lost. But standing in that classroom, surrounded by the chaos of children and decorations and life, Jack understood something profound. Sarah's death hadn't ended his capacity to love. It had taught him how precious love was, how important it was to hold on to the people who mattered. And Emma mattered. This bright, curious, resilient child who'd suffered her own losses and still found ways to be joyful. She deserved to have people in her life who showed up, who cared, who didn't leave. Jack made a decision in that moment, one he'd been circling around for months but hadn't quite committed to. That evening, after he'd driven Emma home and they'd recounted the day's events to Dorothy, Jack asked if he could speak with both of them together. Something in his tone made Dorothy take notice. She sent Emma to wash up for dinner, then faced Jack with her arms crossed. "What's on your mind, Mr. Reeves?" "I've been thinking about something, and I wanted to discuss it with both of you. But I need Emma present for this conversation." Dorothy's eyes narrowed slightly. "This sounds serious." "It is, but it's good serious, I hope." When Emma returned, they gathered in the living room. Emma looked between the adults with curiosity, sensing something important was happening, but not sure what. Jack took a breath, steadying himself. "Emma, you know how I've been coming around a lot. Helping with homework, having dinner here, spending time with you." Emma nodded. "Yeah, because we're friends. We are friends. But I've been thinking that maybe we could be more than that. Not replacing anyone. Your mom will always be your mom, and nobody can change that. But maybe I could be something else. Someone consistent in your life. Someone who promises to stick around and be there for you. Like a grandpa?" Emma asked. The label caught Jack off guard, but it fit better than he expected. He was old enough to be her grandfather, and the role felt right, felt possible in a way that other family connections might not. "Something like that, yes." Emma's face scrunched up in thought. "So you want to be my grandpa?" "If you'd like that. If your grandmother is okay with it." Both of them looked at Dorothy, who'd gone very still. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Mr. Reeves, Jack, are you saying you want to be a permanent part of this family?" "I am. I know I can't legally claim any role. I'm not blood, not officially anything. But I want to be here for Emma. I want to be someone she can count on. I want to keep the promises I've already made and make new ones." "What about your traveling?" "The open road? All those years of running. I'm done running. This is where I want to be." Emma had been processing all of this with visible concentration. Now she spoke up, her voice small but hopeful. "If you're my grandpa, does that mean you'll come to all my school things? And my birthday? And teach me stuff?" "All of that and more," Jack confirmed. "And you won't leave? Even when things get hard?" The question held weight. Emma knew about people leaving. Her father had left. Her mother had died. She'd learned too young that people didn't always stay. "I won't leave," Jack said firmly. "I promise you that. I'll be here as long as you want me here." Emma looked at Dorothy. "Grandma, is it okay if Jack is my grandpa too? I know you can't have two grandpas on the same side, but maybe he could be like an honorary one." Dorothy wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Oh, sweetie, I think that would be wonderful. If it's what you want and what Jack wants, then yes. It's absolutely okay." Emma launched herself at Jack, wrapping her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug. "Yes, I want you to be my grandpa. Can I call you Grandpa Jack?" Jack returned the embrace, feeling something break open in his chest. Not pain, but release. The wall he'd built around his heart was finally fully crumbling. Grandpa Jack sounds perfect. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, still chattering excitedly about having two grandparents, Jack and Dorothy sat in the living room with cups of coffee. Neither of them was drinking. "You understand what you're taking on?" Dorothy said. It wasn't a question. "I do. Emma's going to have questions as she gets older. About her mother, about Sarah, about all the connections between them. We're going to have to figure out how to tell her the truth in ways she can handle. We'll figure it out together." "Together," Dorothy repeated, testing the word. "I've been doing this alone for so long. Claire and then just me and Emma. Having help, having someone to share the responsibility with. It's strange but good. I know I'm not replacing your husband, or Emma's father, whoever he was. You're not replacing anyone. You're adding to what we are, making us more complete." Dorothy met his eyes. "Thank you, Jack, for stopping here, for staying, for giving us a chance." "Thank you for letting me in," Jack replied, "for trusting me with Emma, for believing I could be more than the broken man who showed up with a disabled motorcycle. You were never just broken. You were healing. You just needed a reason to finish the process." Jack thought about that, about Emma wearing Sarah's necklace, about how one tragedy had somehow connected to another across time and space, creating something new and unexpected and precious. "Sarah would have liked Emma," he said quietly. "They're similar in so many ways, bold and curious and kind, and Emma will know Sarah through you, through your stories and memories. That's a gift, Jack, for both of them. It was a gift. The greatest one Jack had received in 15 years. Not closure, exactly. Sarah's death would always hurt. But purpose, connection, a reason to wake up in the morning that went beyond simply surviving another day. He'd found his way home. Finally, 6 months later, on what would have been Sarah's 33rd birthday, Jack and Emma stood in the garden behind Dorothy's house. They'd planted a dogwood tree that morning, its white blossoms already beginning to open despite the early spring chill. "Why a dogwood?" Emma asked, helping Jack pack dirt around the base. They were Sarah's favorite. She loved how they bloomed early, bringing beauty when everything else was still waking up from winter. Emma nodded solemnly, taking this information and storing it with all the other pieces of Sarah she'd been collecting. Over the months, Jack had shared stories. Small ones at first. Sarah's love of terrible puns, her habit of singing off-key in the car, the way she could never keep plants alive, despite her best efforts. Gradually the stories had grown deeper. Sarah's kindness to outsiders at school, her fierce loyalty to friends, her dream of becoming a veterinarian, the person she'd been, complete and complex, not just a tragedy or a memory, but a real human being who'd existed and mattered. "I wish I could have met her," Emma said, not for the first time. "Me too, she would have loved you." "How do you know?" "Because you're exactly the kind of person Sarah was drawn to. Brave and curious and real. She had no patience for fakeness or pretending." Emma finished patting down the dirt and stood back to admire their work. The tree looked small and vulnerable in the large garden, but it would grow. In years to come, it would provide shade and beauty, a living memorial to a girl who died too young. "Grandpa Jack?" Emma's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think people who die can see us? Like, do you think Sarah knows about me, about us?" Jack had wondered the same thing countless times. He'd never been religious, never believed in an afterlife with any certainty, but he'd learned that some questions didn't need definitive answers. "I don't know if she can see us," he said honestly, "but I like to think that somehow, in some way, she knows that her life mattered, that her kindness created ripples that are still spreading. You're one of those ripples. Emma, you carry her name, you wear her necklace, and you're growing up to be someone who makes the world better, just like she did." Emma touched the pendant at her throat, the gesture automatic now. "I want to be like her, like both of them, my mom and Sarah." "You already are." They stood together in the garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, Jack could hear Dorothy calling them in for dinner. The sound of home, of family, of life continuing forward. Jack had thought his story ended the night Sarah died, that the best parts of his life were behind him, confined to memory and grief. But he'd been wrong. His story hadn't ended. It had simply been waiting for the next chapter to begin, a chapter that included a little girl with dirt on her hands and her mother's necklace around her neck. A little girl who'd tried to fix a broken Harley and had somehow fixed a broken man instead. Jack Reeves had finally stopped running, and in stopping he'd found everything he'd been searching for.